My name is Ashton Stewart. I am the SAGEVets program manager, Navy combat veteran, and SAGEVets is a New York State program for older LGBTQ plus veterans. And I want to give a warm welcome to our panelists tonight. We've got Peter Kempner first, who oversees the Volunteers of Legal Service, Legal Department, and Pro Bono program. He joined VOLS as a senior law director in May 2018 and moved into his current role as legal director in May 2019. He received his JD from Benjamin N. Cardoza School of Law at Yeshiva University in 2001 and was admitted to the New York State Bar in 2002. He received his BA in political science from the State University of New York College at Purchase in 1996 and received an MA in political management from the Graduate School of Political Management at the George Washington University in 1998. He is admitted to practice in the Eastern and Southern districts of New York and is accredited to practice by the United States Department of Veteran Affairs. He is also an adjunct clinical professor at the New York Law School, where he created and taught their first Veterans Justice Clinic since 2015. Pete serves as a member to multiple military and veterans committees, including the New York State Bar Association's Committee on Veterans. And earlier this year, Pete was appointed by the Chief Judge of the State of New York to serve on the Attorney Emeritus Advisory Council. Congratulations on that appointment, Pete. And prior to working at VOLS, Pete worked in Brooklyn Legal Services HIV unit from 2001 until 2011 as a staff attorney and government benefits specialist. In May 2011, he helped found the Veterans Justice Project, an innovative general legal service practice focusing on veterans active duty military personnel and their families. I must also add here that Pete was instrumental in leading the effort to create the SAGEVets program at SAGE back in 2014. Really happy about that because it gave me a job. So tonight, Pete is going to start the program. We're going to talk, he's going to talk about a lot of good things. And without further ado, Pete, would you like to take the floor? It's all yours.
Thanks, Ashton, and welcome everybody. Good evening. Let me make sure that I could share my screen because we didn't try that before. Let's go. How's that look?
Perfect.
Great. I'm Pete Kempner, as Ashton said, and I am the legal director here at Volunteers of Legal Service. Let me first start off by telling you a little bit about our organization and really specifically about our Veterans Initiative. So VOLS has been around for about 3.5 decades. Our work is to provide free legal services to low-income New Yorkers in a variety of areas. We have a small business practice, an immigration practice, unemployed workers practice, and a couple other programs. But what's important today is our senior law project. And our senior law project focuses on doing wills and other advance directives for low-income seniors here in New York City. And in our senior law practice, we actually have a couple of sub-projects that focus on particular populations. And one of those is our Veterans Initiative. And as Ashton was talking about, I've been providing free legal services to veterans for over a decade now and doing free legal services for New Yorkers for over 20 years. And when I came over to VOLS, I knew that here in New York City, we have an aging veteran population. And I knew that also veterans have some specific needs and wanted to craft a program that met those needs and also had an element of military and veteran cultural competence built in. And so we assure that all of our attorneys are VA accredited, are familiar with veteran benefits and issues. So, even though our practice is focused on planning for the future, we're able to screen for other issues as they come up. Because for me, it's important to have a holistic approach to providing legal services to our clients. So, but that's neither here nor there. What we're here to talk about tonight is planning for the future. And we get calls all the time from clients who really aren't sure of exactly what they need, in order to have the right plan in place in the event that something happens to them. And, we get questions, ranging from I want a living will, and I want a last will and testament, and I want a power of attorney, and I want a healthcare proxy. And oftentimes people think that they just really need one document in order to take care of all their needs. And I've got to break the bad news to them that there is no one magic document to take care of all the eventualities. And so what we do, and what I will do tonight, is kind of walk them through the various documents, what they're used for, and then also what could happen if you don't have them. So when we do this, we kind of split it up into two different buckets, right? Documents that are important during your lifetime, and then the documents that are important for after you pass away. And I know Ashton put an asterisk on this earlier, but I'm going to repeat the caveat that what I'm going to talk about tonight is New York law. And I know there's folks from all over the country. And I think that really the kind of the thought process and the planning you want to do is universal. It's not just New York about the things that you want to think about and the eventualities that you want to prepare for. But all of these documents are state specific. There's no national power of attorney. There's no national format for a will. All of these things are governed by state law. And I am licensed to practice law in New York State, nowhere else. And so just take everything, if you're outside of New York, with a grain of salt, that you are going to want to consult with a local attorney or other provider in order to make sure that you have the right documents in place for where you live. And so, like I was saying, we split it up into two different buckets. What's, documents that are important during your lifetime, and then the documents that are important for after you pass away. And for me, really, the most important documents are the documents that are important during your lifetime. A lot of the things that happen for after you pass away is, what happens to your stuff. And I know that's important to a lot of people, but I want to make sure that my clients are cared for while they're here, that their needs are met, that they're able to stay in the community for as long as possible. And that's why really my focus is mostly on the documents that are important to your lifetime. I'll also say my clients, we provide free legal services. We do that for people who are low income. And so my clients don't often have, mansions and Rembrandts and sports cars, and so, we're talking about people who have relatively modest means. And so for me, again, the importance is, how do we make sure that you can stay in the community as long as possible? How do we make sure that your caregivers are empowered? How do we make sure that your wishes are clear and they're able to be carried out by the people that you love and you trust the most? So first bucket is the documents that are important during your lifetime. And in that, we also kind of split it in half. First is with respect to healthcare decision making, right? We want to make sure that in the event that you don't have the ability to make decisions for yourself with respect to your healthcare, that the person that you want is able to step into your shoes and make those decisions for you. And so the first document that we prepare for clients is the healthcare proxy. In this document, you are the principal. You're appointing another person who's called your agent to make those medical decisions for you if you cannot make them yourself. And oftentimes, and this is not just with respect to the healthcare proxy, but it's with respect to all of the documents that we do, people worry that by doing these documents that they're giving something up, right? That if I do a healthcare proxy, then I'm not going to be able to make my own healthcare decisions. And I'm here to assure you that that is not true. I am my spouse's agent under their healthcare proxy. And if I was to accompany them to a medical appointment, the doctor's not going to turn to me and say, we going to do, procedure A or procedure B? No, they're sitting right here. They make their own decisions. It's only at the point at which they're unable to make decisions does the healthcare proxy kick in, and then they turn to the agent to be that surrogate, to be that substitute in order to make decisions for you. And so, it is not something that you're giving up. It's simply like a backup plan, right? You're making sure that if you can't make those decisions, it's the person you want to make those decisions who is in that role. And so what happens if you don't have them? Well, in New York State, we have a law called the New York State Family Healthcare Decisions Act. And under the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, it has really a family tree that's laid out to determine who makes decisions for you if you can't make them yourself. And it's, what you would expect. If you have a spouse, then it's your spouse who's able to step into your shoes. If you don't have a spouse or a living spouse, then it's your adult children. If you don't have adult children, it's your parents. If you don't have parents, it's your siblings, and so on through the family tree. Well, sometimes those people aren't the ones that you want stepping into your shoes to make healthcare decisions. We talk to folks who maybe they grew up, and I'm going to be real biased in favor of New York City right now. And so I apologize because I know I got a national audience. But, let's say you grew up in the Midwest and because of your LGBTQ identity, your family didn't accept you, and you left there and you came to New York City, and you found your family, right? And you have a family you choose, and the people who are closest to you are your chosen family here in New York, and you never got married, you never had kids. And if you fall ill and you're unable to make your decisions under the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, maybe it's your brother back in Kansas or wherever who tortured you as a young person, who's now first in line to make those life and death decisions for you. And that's not what you want, right? You want it to be those people who are closest to you, the people who know your philosophy on what kind of interventions you want and all of those things. And I think, maybe if you're married, great. And then your spouse could be in that role, but not everybody's gotten married, right? And when we're talking about LGBTQ seniors, that opportunity didn't come until later in life. And so perhaps that never happened for you. And LGBTQ seniors are less likely to have children. And so you don't have those people who naturally fall into that role. And so if that's the situation you find yourself in, then it's even that more important to have a healthcare proxy to make sure that you are able to empower your caregiver to make these critical decisions. I want to say this also about not just this document, but about every document. You want to make sure you have a conversation first with whoever you're naming as the agent. Ashton and I have known each other for years now. I consider him a friend. But I think he'd be kind of surprised if I named him as my agent under healthcare proxy. He would say, look, I like Pete. We've worked together for a long time, but I'm not making, critical healthcare decisions for him. So, you want to make sure that you have that conversation because you want somebody who is ready, willing, and able to help, right? To step into that role. And it's often, really tough decisions that somebody has to make. And so not only do you want to make sure that they are ready to do this, but that they also understand what your philosophy is. If you become so ill that, you're in a terminal condition, some people feel strongly that they don't want to be hooked up to a bunch of machines at the end of life. And I think Toby later on is going to talk about these issues. But some people want to fight for every second they have on this earth, right? And then there's a lot of gray area in between those two positions. And so you want to have those conversations. And I know those conversations are hard to have, but they are important. So that is the healthcare proxy. The next document that I want to talk about is a living will. And this is also with respect to medical decision making. But it's really different than the healthcare proxy because instead of naming a person, you're actually laying out that philosophy of the kind of interventions you want or you don't want. And it really is only at a point at which you're in a terminal condition that this kicks in. The healthcare proxy, I could be walking down the street and get hit by a bus and knocked unconscious, and maybe my leg is badly injured and they have to make a decision about amputation or not. I'm not in a terminal condition. And so it's not about, are they going to do cardiac resuscitation? Are they going to do artificial nutrition and hydration? It is this, individual dynamic decision that a person could make. A living will is limited, right? It's limited only to those end of life decision making. And so certainly it's less dynamic, but it could be an important tool for somebody. First of all, if you don't have somebody that you trust and you love enough to name in as an agent under healthcare proxy, it could serve as a substitute in order to let your healthcare providers know what your philosophy is. Or it actually could also serve hand in hand with a healthcare proxy to have, to inform your caregiver about what's important to you and what your wishes are. Because like I said, you should have that conversation, but some people don't. Those are hard conversations to have. I know I talk to clients all the time who are naming an adult child as their agent, and I say, well, did you talk to them about what kind of interventions you want or what you don't want? And they said, well, I tried, but my kid put their fingers in their ears and said, Dad, you're never going to die. You're never going to die. I don't want to talk about this, right? And stuck their head in the sand. So it could serve to inform your healthcare proxy in that way. Or maybe you did have that conversation, but you had that conversation 20 years ago. And it could serve as a refresher and as a crutch really for your agent to be able to lean on and say, okay, I know what Pete wants because he laid it out in his living will. And so under New York state law, absent any clear written instructions, a doctor, a medical provider really is obligated to take all necessary steps to keep you alive. And so this is particularly important for people who don't want those interventions because, otherwise interventions will happen. I will say this also about, the question always comes up with, okay, I got these things. What do I do with them? And so for your healthcare proxy and your living will, you want to make sure you give those to your healthcare providers so they have them on file. It's like a tree that falls in the woods when there's no one there. Does it make a sound? So if you do these documents and you tuck them away in your file cabinet and nobody knows about them, it doesn't do you any good. So you want to make sure you're providing these to your medical providers, you're providing them to your agents that you're naming under these documents, so they're readily accessible. The other great thing about the healthcare proxy is that it contains the contact information for your agents. And so, you want, maybe I go into the doctor and something happens and I fall unconscious and the doctor says, well, I know Pete is married, but I don't know his spouse's name and I don't know his spouse's contact information and I don't know how to get in touch with them. And so if you have this on file, they have that information there. So even if it is the person who would be under New York state law or wherever the law is in your state to make those decisions automatic, to be the one that steps into your shoes by operation of law, it's still useful to have because it gives that contact information there as well. And I mentioned this before, but here are some of the instructions that we include on our living will about cardiac resuscitation, mechanical respiration, tube feeding, antibiotics, pain relief, and all of those. And as you could see, it could be written in the negative or the positive. I do want these things, I don't want these things. And so that's how we lay those out. Next, I'm going to talk about also a document that's important during your lifetime, but on the financial side of things, and that's a durable power of attorney. And so again, you're the principal, and you're naming a person to be your agent, but instead of making healthcare decisions for you, they make property, financial, legal decisions on your behalf. And so this becomes super important in order to make sure your bills get paid, right? If you become so ill that you cannot get to the bank, you cannot, write your checks to your landlord. If you're receiving public benefits of some sort, whether it's from the VA, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP benefits, whatever it is, there often needs to be recertifications, interactions with those agencies. And if you fail to follow up, then your benefits can get cut off. And so your rent doesn't get paid, your utility bills don't get paid, you lose your government benefits. And that really could lead to homelessness, placement in a nursing home, or ending up under a guardianship order by the court. And so, this is a critically, and if people ask me, oh, Pete, you're talking about these 5 different documents, that's too much. What one document should I get? Power of attorney, absolutely top of the list, most important thing. And at least under New York State law, there isn't a backup plan in the same way that we had the Family Healthcare Decisions Act for the healthcare proxy. There is no automatic person who steps into your shoes to do financial decision making for you if you can't do that yourself. Under New York State law, your loved one, your caregiver, your spouse, even, spouses aren't allowed to sign contracts for you or go into your bank account unless it's a joint account. They're not allowed to apply for benefits for you. And so if you're in a condition where you can no longer do these things yourself, then your loved one is going to have to go to court and petition for guardianship. And, the court's not going to just take their word for it that you are incapacitated. They are going to do an investigation. And that investigation is going to require them to interview your doctors, pull your medical records, talk to neighbors and family members to see if you're truly incapacitated. And if your loved one is somebody who lives out of state, or they work full time and they can't take off time from work to petition for guardianship, or they're just having a really hard time navigating the court system, they might have to hire a lawyer. And the other thing is, this doesn't happen overnight, right? This takes weeks or months for a guardianship order to be put in place. And so between the fact that it is invasive, that it is time consuming and potentially costly, and could be avoided by having a power of attorney, it's just a no-brainer to me to put a power of attorney in place to make sure that if you are no longer have capacity, that your loved ones are empowered to act on your behalf. I will say this though about a power of attorney: it is a powerful document. It is the keys to the kingdom. If somebody gave me power of attorney, I could walk down to their bank and start making withdrawals. And so you want to make sure that the person that you're naming as your agent is somebody that you absolutely trust, because really it is and oftentimes we see it misused as a tool of elder abuse. Elder abuse doesn't just happen as physical violence, it also happens as financial exploitation. And many times powers of attorney are involved in those financial exploitations. So you want to make sure that the person that you are picking is somebody that you trust to not take advantage of you. All right, so those are the documents that are important during your lifetime. Now we will turn the page. Oh, and let me actually take one more second with the power of attorney. It lists all these different transactions, right? whether it's, you know, litigation or real estate or public benefits, whatever it is. You could make a power of attorney that's limited, right, to just certain transactions. But we do powers of attorney that are as expansive as possible. You never know what could happen. You know, one of these things is listed as tax matters. And I've had clients say to me, Pete, you know, my sole source of income is Social Security. I don't pay taxes. Why do I need to give my agent the power to do taxes? And I explained, look, you never know what could happen. Maybe you hit the lottery, right? And you got to deal with the IRS or the State Department of Taxation. You know, maybe, you know, something happens to you sadly and there's a lawsuit and there's tax consequences. So we, you know, this is very much for us, what if, right? It's not limited to, you know, the current circumstances on the ground. We want to make sure that agents are empowered in a way that is as expansive as possible, because you never know what if, you know, what could happen. And for me, this is all about taking down barriers and not putting them up. And that's why we really not only make this document as expansive as possible, but also want to have this full suite of documents in place to deal with all these different eventualities. All right, documents that are important for after you pass away. And the first one is the big one, and this is the one that people think of first when they think about planning for the future, and that's your last will and testament. And so the language is a little different here, right? The person that you're naming is your executor, not an agent, but your executor. And this is the person, you know, who's going to be in charge of your estate after you pass away. And you know, don't get that term estate to be something that you think is not you, right? People think of estates and they think of mansions and sports cars and, you know, Rembrandts. Everybody has an estate, right? During our lifetime, we have stuff. You know, some people have a lot of stuff. Some people just have the shirt on their back. But whatever it is, whatever your belongings are, is your estate. And, you know, you want to make sure that whatever you have goes to where or who you want it to go to, and that the person that is carrying out those wishes is the person that you trust to do that for you. And so just breaking down the language of the document, even last will and testament, right? Think about testament. Has the same root as testify. When you testify, you speak what's on your mind, right? And so your testament is a place where you say what you want to happen. And if you don't have a last will and testament, the law actually says that you have died intestate. You haven't spoken. And so what happens is then the intestacy statute, the law that dictates what happens to your estate after you pass away, kicks in. And like what we were talking about with the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, you know, it's based on this family tree. It's your spouse, it's your adult children, or your children, actually not adults. It doesn't matter. They don't need to make decisions necessarily. Parents, siblings, and so forth through the family tree. Again, you know, that might not be who you want to receive to be beneficiaries of your estate, or be in charge of your estate. Right. And so particularly if you have a non-traditional family, if it's a family you choose rather than what the law defines family as, then it's really important to have a last will and testament in place to override the intestacy statute, to make sure that your possessions pass to who you want them to pass to, and that the person who's in charge of carrying out those wishes is the person that you pick. And so that's the last will and testament. All right, last but not least is the appointment of agent to control the disposition of remains, which is a mouthful. So we'll just call it the control of remains form. And so like the other documents, you're naming somebody, again, it's your agent, to be in charge of what happens to your body after you pass away. And so, you know, how do you want your final resting to look? Is it going to be a burial, a cremation? Do you want a funeral? Do you want your ashes, sprinkled in the ocean? You want to be buried in the VA cemetery? You absolutely do not want to be buried in the VA cemetery. Whatever your wishes are, you lay those out in the control of remains form. You name an agent to be in charge of carrying out those wishes for you. And then also, if you've made any prepaid pre-arrangements, so let's say you have a headstone pre-purchased, if you have a prepaid funeral agreement, if you have a burial plot that's been purchased, you also put that stuff in the control of remains form, that information in the control of remains form. Your loved ones are going to be distraught when you pass away, and you don't want them to say, I know Pete said that he had a prepaid funeral arrangement, but I don't know if it's with funeral home A or funeral home B, and they're rifling through your files trying to find this. They're calling funeral homes. No, you want to be able to make this easier for them, make this as easy as possible, to give it to them on a silver platter. You want to say who, you want to say where, you want to say how, right? And you have all of that stuff in the control of remains form. Again, I sound like a broken record, but if you don't have one, who's in charge? What are the consequences? And again, New York State's public health law lays out this hierarchical list of who's in charge: spouse, adult children, parents, siblings, and so on down the line. Again, it might not be the person that you want, but in this kind of circumstances, and sadly, we've seen this too many times, where it is, somebody's partner of decades, but they were never married, they never had a domestic partnership, then they show up to claim your remains, to claim your body, and the funeral, the morgue, or the hospital, or whoever has your remains will not release your remains because you don't have authorization. You are not a spouse, you are not a family member in the traditional legal sense. Then you have to go through this whole rigmarole in order to prove, because actually very, very down on the bottom of the list for claiming somebody's remains in New York State is a close friend. But you got to get through this whole thing first, that there is no family that's ready, willing, or able to step up and claim somebody's remains. And you don't want to have that fight. You want to make sure that, that your loved one, the person that you want to be in charge, is able to do this smoothly and easily. And so people will say, well, why don't I just put this information in my will? I'm putting everything else about what happens to my stuff. Why can't I put what happens to my body in my will as well? Well, the reason why is because a will is a piece of paper, right? I could show up and say, here's Pete's will, or here's Ashton's will. Not that I'm wishing anything ill on you, Ashton. Who is to say that that is an authentic document? Well, the person who says it's an authentic document is the court. In New York State, that's the surrogates court. And so you file for what's called probate. That's the proceeding that you have to go through to make sure that a will is valid. Was it validly drafted? Was it properly witnessed? Is it truly somebody's last will and testament? Did they do one afterwards? That whole determination takes time. And especially recently with COVID and the court shutting down and so many people passing away and everything being backed up, that could take weeks, if not months. And you don't want to wait weeks or months in order to be able to claim your loved one's body and to carry out their final wishes. And so that's why New York State law and we fully endorse this practice has taken out who is in control of somebody's remains from the process of the last will and testament. You can put it in there, but it might get dicey, right? And it might take a lot of time. So you separate that out to make this process easier and go more smoothly. So this is probably the document that we do that people have heard the least about, but also it plays a really important role. My contact information is up here, but I'm going to take this down because I'm going to turn it over to Toby to talk some more, but I could put this up again at the end, or we could put it in the chat, whatever's easiest. But I'll stop my share now. And I think we're going to take questions at the end, right, Ashton?
Yes, I would like to spend a couple of minutes because this is a lot of information. If anybody's got a question that they think that they can't wait until the end, please, by all means, let's hear from you now before we do move on to the second part of this program. I did save a couple of questions from the chat. I am monitoring that. So if you would like to put your questions there, I'll be watching for that as well. Wait a few seconds.
I have a question, actually. I was wondering, I might not be able to stay for the whole meeting. So how would I be able to get access to all this information?
We are going to be sending out a copy of the video. This is being recorded tonight. So as soon as it gets handled by my comms team, which will probably be no longer than a couple of days, I will email it to everybody that's here tonight. And I'm also,
Can you send the presentation as well, please?
Yes, that will definitely be part of it. I'll get that from Pete.
I'm going to put my email address in again in the chat to make sure you got the proper information.
Okay.
And then that's pretty much, this is a lot of information. So I need to kind of review it again. And
yes, fair enough.
Yeah.
We're not going to quiz anybody. There is a lot of information here and questions may occur to you later, and you can always reach out to me at any time. And even if you're in another state, we'll help you get directed to the people that are going to help you the most. So great. Thank you so much, Pete. That was amazing. And yes, you are definitely a friend of mine and I would be able to help you in any way possible, but thank you for not putting me as your proxy. Our next guest is another friend of mine. Toby Weiss is Assistant Vice President of Cultural Diversity for the Metropolitan Jewish Health System Incorporated, Hospice and Palliative Care. She oversees programming focused on improving access to culturally unique and underserved populations. She implemented an agency-wide LGBTQ+ initiative that led to a SAGE Platinum credential and an adaptation of the electronic health record to assess and document sexual orientation and gender identity. Over the years, Toby helped develop the halakhic pathway to ensure Orthodox Jewish patients have care delivered in accordance to the Jewish law. Toby has helped launch an innovative 3-module digital toolkit for healthcare professionals aimed at improving delivery of person-centered trauma-informed care, both to Holocaust survivors and other traumatized populations. Toby's expertise in developing educational and outreach programs reach into all culturally unique communities served by MJHS and builds bridges of understanding that reduce barriers to accessing care while embracing the needs of all who are seriously ill. Among the many diversity and leadership boards where Toby currently serves, she is also on the We Honor Veterans Partner Committee since its inception in 2010. Toby received a master's degree in human resources and organizational development from the Robert J. Milano Graduate School of Management and Urban Policy of the New School University, certification in bioethics and medical humanities from the Yeshiva University Einstein School of Medicine, and Cardozo School of Law, and a bachelor's degree in marketing and merchandising from Stern College for Women of Yeshiva University. We've got some seriously educated panelists tonight. So thank you so much, Toby, for being here with us tonight. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Because I'm a bit of a tech nerd.
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, can you see my slideshow? Why can't I? There we go. Okay, so Pete, your presentation was great. I learned some stuff, and you're a hard act to follow, but let me see what I could do. So I'm going to speak with you. I'm going to piggyback on what Pete spoke about, and I'm going to talk about accessing healthcare resources when you're facing serious illness, which would leverage all of the preparation and the documents that you fill out in the advanced care planning process. The one thing that I will add in the direction of advanced care planning is the 5 wishes, which is also considered an advanced directive. And it has reciprocity in 42 states in the United States. So I don't know if you could see this, but this is a copy. This is a version of the 5 wishes, and it comes in many different languages. And the 5 wishes actually serves as a living will. And the 5 questions that they ask you to think about are: 1, who is the person that I want to make care decisions for me when I can't? The second is the kind of medical treatment I want or don't want. The third is how comfortable I want to be. As Pete pointed out, there are some people who want to fight up to the last breath, and there are some people who say, I don't want this. How I want people to treat me, and what I want my loved ones to know. And to me, that the 5th wish is what I would call an ethical will. It's the kinds of conversation, the words that you want to impart on those that you love most, that maybe you didn't take the time or have the opportunity to share during a lifetime. So 1 second, I think I want to just change the view. Hold on a minute. That way. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me go back. The other thing about the 5 wishes is that it also serves as a healthcare proxy. And in fact, the back of the document, the last 2 pages, actually have a designation for healthcare agent. And as long as you have it witnessed by 2 people, it will be accepted in 42 states. And a healthcare proxy is actually, whether in New York alone, the formal New York State healthcare proxy, or in any state, the healthcare proxy is a document that is legal, but it does not require an attorney to fill out. I just want to put that out to you. You just need 2 witnesses, and then it is good to go. And this 5 wishes document also has a wallet size healthcare proxy, if you can't see it, but you could cut it out, put it in your wallet, and if God forbid, you became unconscious, you fell in the street, or you were hit by a car, regardless of where you are, what people will do as Good Samaritans is you call 911, but then we also look in people's wallets to see who they are. And if you have the healthcare proxy, the wallet size, then people know who to call to reach out and inform about what your situation is. So Pete spoke about the importance of having the conversation and being able to fill out the document. I'm going to use this slide to transition to the primary portion of my conversation, which is about the healthcare options that you might seek when you reach a turning point in your care because of a chronic illness that may become a serious illness. But when you talk with loved ones, it becomes very, very important to set the stage. And it's not always a comfortable conversation, but it's very, very important to bring the right people together, all of the stakeholders, whether it's your biological family or your family of choice, close friends, neighbors, whoever it is that you're going to rely upon, because having transparency in your conversation will mitigate conflict later on when people say, no, I know so-and-so, I know Toby, she would have never wanted this. Well, having the right people in the conversation prevents that kind of dynamic of conflict later on. When a doctor does share with you that you have some sort of a life-limiting illness or a condition that is serious, it's scary. You know, we don't always know what to make of what we're hearing. And doctors are not always well trained in how to have conversations with patients. So it becomes very important for you to realize that you have control over what you have control over. You don't have control of what you don't have control over. So asking the right questions is very, very important, and sharing what you're feeling inside with those that you trust most is also very important. So you have to be able to address as well what your emotions are. And when a doctor speaks with you, or you're with family and or close friends, or whoever it is that you're speaking with, take notes, document the information, and make it very clear where you're keeping the information so that it becomes a resource that is accessible. So now I'm going to speak with you about hospice and palliative care, which are care options. A lot of people don't really understand the distinction between hospice and palliative care. So I want to try to demystify this terminology so that you have a better understanding of what's available should the time come that you need it. Both hospice and palliative care aim to relieve symptom burden and are delivered by interdisciplinary teams. Now, not all palliative care is, all hospice is palliative care, but not all palliative care is hospice. It's a holistic type of care, both palliative care and hospice, but they're not identical. So I'm going to go over the definitions for them. There's an organization called the National Consensus for Quality Palliative Care. And the definition that they give for palliative care is that it seeks to prevent and relieve pain and suffering and ensure the highest quality of life. And this is the operative phrase now, regardless of age of the individual or stage of serious or life-limiting illness. That is a very important phrase to understand, because what it's telling you is that you can have palliative care, which is aimed at pain and symptom relief. You could access palliative care regardless of the type of illness you have, and you don't have to be in a serious or advanced stage of illness. It's holistic care. It addresses all domains of care: physical, intellectual, emotional, social, and spiritual needs, through access to information and choice. One of the healthcare laws that came about in 2010, I believe, then it actually dovetailed along with when the Family Healthcare Decisions Act came about and the Isolated Patient Bill. There was something called the Palliative Care Information Act and the Palliative Care Access Act. And what these two laws mandated is that a physician who's caring for you, if you are diagnosed with a life-limiting illness, they are now required by law to tell you about your diagnosis and to also share with you options, treatment options, both curative, aggressive curative treatments and non-aggressive treatments. They're mandated by law, and if they don't, they can be fined. The other law that was passed at the same time was something called the Palliative Care Access Act. The Palliative Care Access Act mandates that a hospital and a care provider must ensure that if a person is discharged from a hospital or from another venue of care, that the discharge plan must be to a venue and a setting where care can be delivered in alignment and appropriately based on the disease that you have. So the Palliative Care Information Act and the Palliative Care Access Act work together. What would that look like? Just as an example, if a person was hospitalized with a life-limiting illness, and let's say their trajectory was far along, and they were being discharged from the hospital, and they needed a higher level of care, such as hospice. And if the hospital discharged them to a nursing home with rehab, and they ended up going to a rehab, they were admitted to the rehab, and they bounced back to the hospital for the same reason that they were previously hospitalized, the hospital is going to get fined, they're going to be penalized, and the nursing home, the rehab that took them, will also be penalized. Why? Because they were discharged with a plan that was not safe. So it becomes very, very important that care providers address the needs and make care plans and discharge plans appropriate for the type of illness and the situation that a patient is in. So what's hospice? I already explained and shared with you the definition of palliative care. So what's hospice? Hospice is a specialist level of palliative care. It's billed through Medicare, Medicaid, or other private insurances that meet the physical, spiritual, and psychosocial needs of the individual and families during an advanced or terminal illness. That's the operative phrase here. Hospice is for a person that is in a terminal or advanced stage of the illness. The focus of care when a person is on hospice is not for cure, it's for comfort. It's to help allow a person to have the highest quality of life for as many days, weeks, months, years as they are here. So this is what the model of palliative care and hospice look like. So if you see this chart, you see in the beginning on the left-hand side, the green areas, the lighter green and then the darker green area. So I'll use the example of a cancer because that is easy for people to understand. We're familiar with it at this day and age. There are so many different types of cancer. Let's say a person was diagnosed with a cancer and it was early in the disease process, and they were undergoing aggressive curative treatment, disease modifying therapy. So what you see is that most of what they're getting is disease modifying therapy, but they may also be getting palliative care at the same time in order to manage the side effects that they may get from the treatments of chemotherapy or radiation oncology. Even though we want to seek curative treatment because we want to live and we want to try and cure ourselves of the disease, we still have symptoms that may require pain and symptom management, so you're getting palliative care. As the disease continues to progress and it moves to a different stage, it may reach a terminal stage of the disease, so you would be getting less aggressive treatment and more palliative care for the pain and symptom management, until it gets to a point where the physician may say, listen, if we give you any more chemo or we give you any more radiation, it's actually going to be more harmful than helpful. It's at that stage, that's the tipping point. It's at that stage where hospice would be indicated, and that's where all of the care that a person is getting is palliative in nature. It's a specialized level of palliative care, which is known as hospice. Hospice also offers, as part of the comprehensive basket of services, pre and post bereavement. And once a person passes away, the family, the friends, the circle of friends are entitled to bereavement services for 13 months. How is hospice paid for? So hospice is actually a Medicare covered benefit. It's a federal benefit. It's also covered by Medicaid. Everyone is entitled to it. If you were not Medicare eligible because you weren't old enough, or you were not, even for someone who's not a documented citizen in the United States, there's even charity care. So people can get hospice whether or not they have insurance. Obviously, a hospice is going to eventually go out of business if all of the patients that they're serving are on charity care, but most hospices will also offer charity care. If you have private insurance, it becomes very important to ask the case manager or the agent that you deal with whether or not they have within the election of benefits an option for hospice. When you have private insurance, this is before you have Medicare or Medicaid, There's usually co-pays attached to it. But when somebody's getting hospice under the Medicare, the Medicaid benefit, there are no co-pays. Everything is completely covered. Most people in the country get routine home hospice. I'm going to go over the different levels of care. And the routine home hospice can be given wherever a person resides, whether it's in their own home, a child's home, a partner's home, a parent's home, a skilled nursing facility. Wherever the person resides is where the care will go. How come it's not advancing? What's going on? I don't see it advancing. There we go. So what are the hospice eligibility criteria? When would a person be entitled to hospice? It's when there is a 6-month prognosis should the disease run its normal course. So the magic questions that doctors are asked before they will certify for hospice eligibility is, would you be surprised if within the next 6 to 12 months, a person would succumb to this disease? If the answer is no, I would not be surprised, then that is indicative of hospice eligibility. You need 2 doctors to certify eligibility. It's generally whoever the overseeing physician is, whether it's a primary care physician, whether it's a specialist, an oncologist, pulmonologist, cardiologist, a hospital attending, and then a hospice physician as well. The only other criterion, so again, the first criterion is that a person is in a terminal stage of their primary primary disease for which they're being referred to hospice, and 2 physicians have to certify eligibility that they're in a terminal stage. That's criterion 1. The second criterion is simply that the patient is no longer trying to cure themselves of the disease process. They're seeking quality of life, they're seeking comfort care. They're not trying to cure the disease. They know it's not going away. So what does hospice look like? There's 4 different levels of care on hospice. The first is routine home hospice, which more than 95% of patients in the United States are on. Essentially what it means is that you are stable enough to be cared for in a home-like setting. Again, whether it's your home or a nursing home or a family or loved one's home. What do you get under the hospice benefit? It's a comprehensive basket of services that includes interdisciplinary care. So there is an RN case manager who functions as the coordinator of care. There's a board certified pain and palliative medicine physician who oversees the care. There's a medical social worker. There's a pastoral care provider. All of the medicines, all of the durable medical equipment, they're all covered under this routine home hospice benefit. There's a volunteer who can support friendly visits as well. And then there's the pre and post bereavement. And I'd say that one of the most unique distinctions about hospice as a home care type of service is that it's 24/7, 365 days a year. What that means is that if, God forbid, a person was on hospice and there was an emergency, we all know most emergencies don't happen during the day, because during the day, you could always get someone to help you. Emergencies happen after hours, nights, weekends, holidays, right? So that is one of the things that's unique about hospice, is that after hours, there's an on-call service. And it is staffed by nurses, by social workers, by physicians, so that if, God forbid, you had an emergency at 2 in the morning, you called the call center, a nurse is going to pick up the phone and they're going to figure out with you what's going on, what your urgent need is. They will be able to talk you through what kind of meds you have in the house or what you have in the house to address these needs. And if needed, they could even dispatch someone to come in the middle of the night. Of course, if God forbid there was an emergency that warranted somebody going back to the hospital for a non-hospice related issue, then you go back to the hospital. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's a 24/7 kind of care that takes over primary care of the patient. And one of the unique things about hospice that has changed over the years is that if you have a physician in the community that you trust and has been caring for you for years, that physician can be part of the hospice care team. Very often you have, I'm going to use cancer as the example again, you may have an oncologist that knows you, that has been with you for years. That oncologist, if the oncologist chooses to remain part of the primary care team, they can be part of the hospice team. If not, they can still be a consulting physician and be regularly informed about the status of your care or your loved one's care. So routine home hospice is the level of care that most people receive when they come on to hospice. It happens to be that New York State is the third lowest in hospice utilization in the country. That's pretty bad statistic, but essentially people in New York are not looking to let go, they are looking to cure themselves, and so they don't utilize hospice. There are other states that have a much higher utilization rate. The next level of care on hospice is something called general inpatient level of care. So let's say somebody is on routine home hospice and they have some sort of acute symptoms. There's a change of clinical status and they have some acute pain or symptoms that cannot be managed sufficiently well at home. That patient can be transitioned to a hospice inpatient unit, whether in a hospital that the hospice contracts with, or in a nursing home where the hospice contracts with, or in a hospice inpatient unit that may be standalone. Like we happen to have a hospice inpatient unit and a hospice residence in the Bronx, but we also contract with many hospitals and nursing homes where this higher acuity level of care can be accessed. The goal of care is to stabilize that patient, manage the pain and symptoms so that they can return home. That is the goal of care, for them to be able to go back to where they want to be. There's another level of care called continuous care. So if a patient is on hospice and they're being cared for in a home setting, but again, they have a some sort of clinical change in their status and they have acute symptoms, but they absolutely do not want to leave their home, but they have these symptoms that are not being managed. In that circumstance, we have this level of care called continuous care, where a home health aide could be put in 12 hours a day and a licensed practical nurse can be put in 12 hours a day until the symptoms are managed and they are stabilized, and then they transition back to the routine home hospice level of care. In both cases, the general inpatient level of care and the continuous care, they are short-term. They're not considered long-term. The goal is to manage the acute symptoms, stabilize the patient, and then transition them back to the routine home hospice level of care. The fourth level of care is something called respite care. Respite care is more for the caregiver than it is for the patient. Let's say you're caring for a loved one or a close relative, and you're just plain burnt out. You just can't do it anymore. In that type of scenario, a loved one who's on hospice can be transitioned to a nursing home that the hospice contracts with for 3, 4, 5 days. You as the caregiver replenish, do whatever it is you need to do, or maybe you needed to go out of town for a family event or a business trip or whatnot, or you just needed quiet time to replenish, to do your errands and to get back to yourself. So that loved one can be transitioned to the nursing home that the hospice contracts with, After 3, 4, 5 days, they come back home and everything resumes as was. They were never discharged off of hospice. The venue of care was just moved to a different setting. So that is this thing called respite care. I will say that in the era of COVID, respite care is not something that people have been taking advantage of for all of the reasons attached to limited entry into nursing homes. But as we move into the endemic as opposed to the pandemic, I expect that this will come back to where it was before. I think that was the last slide. This is my contact information. My cell number, this is my office number. I will give you also my cell number. It's 718-986-6644. And I hope I've given you a good understanding of what hospice is as a care option. And I'm happy to take any questions at all that you may have.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was an amazing program, an amazing presentation. I'm sure there are some questions. I did see that there were a couple of questions in the chat from earlier. I'm going just to start back with Willa, who said, I'm currently in California. My next of kin lives in Idaho. Who do I contact in my circumstance? Any suggestions for Willa?
Go ahead, Toby.
So I was, I'm sorry, I was going to say that while it's true what Pete said early on about state-specific healthcare proxies, but it's also important to know that most states will acknowledge if a person has a healthcare proxy filled out, even if it's from a different state, they will acknowledge and look kindly on the fact that somebody has designated an agent. Even if legally in that state, there's a different form, a state-specific form. The 5 wishes, as I pointed out before, does have reciprocity in 42 states. So that's a very, very important document to get a hold of. You could download it. It's put out by an organization called Aging with Dignity. And a wallet-sized healthcare proxy card, which you can carry with you at all times, will also meet the need.